Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. How do you create the partnerships with sponsors that can help your brand, whether it's to drive additional sales, build awareness, create experiences your customers want, or simply an opportunity to make an emotional connection? There's simply so much more to strategy than just putting your logo on a race car or partnering with a children's hospital in order to be successful. And even still, there are an abundant number of ways to waste money if you're creating opportunities based on emotion without the strategy and measuring it correctly or truly making it part of the fabric of your brand that resonates with your audience. Ken Unger is the president of Charge Sponsorship Marketing Agency, and he's also the author of Sponsorship Strategy: Practical Approaches to Powerful Sponsorships. And on this episode, we'll discuss sponsorships and partners, the emotions created from these experiences, audience alignment, measurement, and strategy, helping out the Little League team, logo slaps, when the CEO plays golf, if Danica won the Indy 500, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a sponsorship marketer named Ken with a shark named Kenneth who people are wanting to sponsor on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Well, Ken, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would tell us a little bit about your background and your career today.
Yeah, Shark, it's great to be here. Thank you. It's great to be kind of part of this audience that you have. And I've been in marketing for about 25 years.
Well, you have a great first name. So
right? All Kenneths kind of were cut from the same cloth, right?
Exactly.
So, about 25 years ago, kind of my career led me to marketing. And then I started Charge, a sponsorship marketing agency, about 15 years ago. We're based in Indianapolis, but we really help brands and properties kind of get the most out of sponsorship. And it's something that I love. I just love helping people kind of get the most out of marketing.
So what was the inspiration? I mean, what was in your background that inspired you to want to start a partnership marketing firm? I mean, you're from New York, so you would think advertising.
Right? So I didn't think advertising because what I love about sponsorship is the partnership aspect of it. I think that's what makes it one of the most powerful forms of marketing. Now, there's a lot of disciplines in marketing that work really well, but what I love about the partnership aspect of it is the third-party validation, is image transfer. It's all those things. When two parties get together, they help each other accomplish their marketing goals, and they do it in a very authentic way. And I've seen outcomes that outstrip advertising and other forms of marketing because of that power. So what I wanted to do was kind of find ways to best harness it and create things with it. My inspiration for starting this business was about creating, and I think a lot of people who are in marketing have the same inspiration.
So how have you seen partnership marketing evolve over that time since you started the agency to today? Obviously, partnership marketing, for a lot of people, they think where you're placing something physically at a store, for example, some of that's changed because we're not visiting, but so much of that is also grown with where we're doing it more in digital. So I'm kind of curious how you've seen the evolution of partnership marketing go from 15 years ago to where you are today. What's really jumped out at you and made you go, aha, with how the market's trending?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. So when I started both in marketing and then starting the agency, partnership marketing was very emotional, I call it a little bit squishy in terms of people got together and created deals based on feeling. And so sometimes that panned out and there were really good outcomes from that. But sometimes because it wasn't really grounded in what's your objective, how do we measure it, all those different things.
That could apply to most of marketing for a lot of people that don't understand ROI and attribution and everything else.
Yeah, well, guilty as charged, right?
Yeah.
I think we've all had deals like that at some point, but the industry, by and large, was not into measurement. Was really kind of, let's put a deal together. And I saw back then what we call a lot of hobby deals. So, for example, you have a CEO who plays golf, and all of a sudden, miraculously, he or
Oh
she,
yeah.
ended up being the title sponsor of a PGA event.
PGA. I've been there, worked for that brand.
So you've seen kind of sometimes these deals came together for reasons that weren't really based in good marketing. So what happened was, especially you saw it after the 2008, 2009, the Lehman crash and the recession then. And then you're really seeing it now is doubling down on, why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve with it? How do we measure it to determine that we actually achieved it? So I really like that because it puts a premium on putting together a great strategy and really kind of thinking things through ahead of time. And I like it because most of those deals end up achieving outcomes as opposed to a wing and a prayer and fingers crossed. And like, I paid $2 million for what? And hoping that at the end of that, you achieve something. So I really appreciate how the industry has evolved. And I think even with COVID, we're doubling down on that again. And we're really getting granular with what do we want to achieve with this.
Well, it's interesting too. I will say, at least emotionally, from deals that I've done in different roles, junior manager to up, a lot of the roles that we did with, at least in relation to partners over the years, when I look back on my career, it was the partnerships that I remember. Maybe not always the results from 5, 10 years ago when I left, but you always remember a lot of the things you do with a partnership that you may not remember from necessarily a campaign.
Right. It lives, it's real, it's about people, and it's about kind of what you create together. So it isn't necessarily static creative. Like you say, you remember it because it was a shared experience that you had with other human beings. So again, that's a part of it that I really, really enjoy.
So how does someone go about forming the strategy if they're looking at partnership marketing? And also, how do they apply that strategy to real achievable growth outcomes? Because if anybody's even looking at the strategy, they at least need to figure out where the bar is. Sometimes people set things up like this and they have lofty, ridiculous expectations, but they may put a good plan together and actually convince themselves that something like this may do, not necessarily partnership marketing, but anything. But there's a lot of times when you need to figure out what the bar is to set, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, Shark, that's a great question. And kind of what we explain to clients is that it's either one of two things in general buckets, right? It's either you have brand goals. So you want to create more brand awareness, you want to increase consideration, you want to improve your image, your brand image. So that's probably brand bucket number one. Then on the other side of it is sales. Is that a sponsor is trying to achieve some sales goals using partnership marketing as the vehicle for it. So it could be lead generation, sales lift, product sampling, all these different things. So you start off with, I want to achieve something in one of those two buckets. You identify what's most important to the brand, and it's part of your integrated marketing strategy, right? Sponsorship should not live on an island that's disconnected from digital, social, your overall marketing strategy,
Not
everything
anymore.
else.
Yeah.
Right. So that's step one. Second is to really understand. We ask sponsors to really understand what their customer base is, their audience, and then when they're thinking about partnerships, they have to mesh it pretty exactly with the audience of the property. So, for example, if you're thinking, we're in the Midwest. It's the Chicago Cubs market, Cincinnati Reds. If you're a baseball fan, so you're looking at those audiences, right? What is the audience for the Chicago Cubs? And you're asking, is that the same audience that I have for my product or service? So that's step two. So the goals, audience, and then you're developing a strategy based on that, like the sponsorship. What am I doing with that other partner? What are those activities that I'm going to engage in using their IP, leveraging the brand through PR or experiential marketing, and then devising a measurement for that, right? Through PR, I want to reach a certain audience. I want to have so many articles placed about the sponsorship. Or from an experiential marketing perspective, I want to participate with that brand on site, and I want to do something that really kind of pushes that sponsorship forward.
So I hate this question because I feel like it's going to be a softball question, like something that CNN would serve Biden or Fox would serve Trump. So this is going to be a little bit of a softball. But why should a brand or another agency want to work with you guys with working with a partnership marketing agency? You just said something that triggered this interest in as somebody who has worked with a lot of agencies, and this is often one of those things that they think they know they can fix, without necessarily having to go out to yet another agency, albeit a partnership marketing firm. So I hate to give you a please sell me on your value, but to throw that complete curveball, help people understand why that's more valuable to go to you than just look at some of your typical internal resources.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and we do get that, and I often see, for example, advertising agencies kind of foray into sponsorship marketing and those types of things, and there are times, especially if they have experience, the outcomes turn out fine. I've seen it on the brand side where there are people experienced in sponsorship from the brand side, and they don't use an agency, and that's fine too. But what a sponsorship agency really does is they've been there, done that from a process perspective. So they're able to suss out opportunities that you might not know existed. And they're able to identify price points and a value proposition that you might not be experienced with. For example, I would never think about media buying. Like, I would not do that because I've done it maybe once in my career and it didn't turn out very well because I'm not an expert in media buying. I would turn to that person in terms of what I should buy and where I should buy and what I should pay. And it's the same thing on a sponsorship perspective in terms of the who, what, where, when, and how much. If you've been there, done that, you're generally going to achieve better outcomes than with someone who hasn't.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. So how does someone go about looking at testing this? Because not everybody's just going to full blown go in with a Chicago Cubs partnership strategy. Some may, if they're in the Chicago area, but maybe somebody in Indianapolis where you are maybe looks at this and just wants to test the waters. That's maybe not the best example, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I do. And you could really test it at any level and any price point. And the reason is because you have properties at every level, right? So on a hyper local level, a little league team is a property, and a small not for profit is a property. And so you go from little league and the really small not for profit all the way up to the Olympic Committee, and the NFL or the Premier League or a Formula One. So in between that is an entire gamut, tens of thousands, I'd say probably hundreds of thousands of different opportunities. The most important thing in doing that, though, is aligning your audience and their audience. Once you've done that, there's a property and a price point that makes sense for your marketing strategy. So, for example, you can pick, if you're a company, you want to test the waters, you can pick a more local sponsorship, something that has a geographic territory that you can easily measure, that you can measure, did you get a lift from sales from it? And generally there's two components, right? There's a rights fee. So the sponsor is paying the rights holder some type of rights fee for the honor of using their intellectual property, their logo, their name. I'm the official, sponsor of your podcast, for example, and I'm on your website and all those types of things. Then the second part is called leverage or activation. And it's what me as a sponsor, what I need to spend to bring that relationship to life. I need to do an advertising campaign or a public relations campaign or a digital campaign or whatever it takes to really bring that sponsorship, that partnership to life. So there's the rights fee plus leverage. That whatever you can afford with those two things added together, there's a sponsorship opportunity that would work for your company.
So many brands today are struggling trying to figure out a way to create customers into being fans of their brands. Talk about how sponsorship marketing can help with that.
Yeah, I often say that that image transfer is the superpower of sponsorship. And what image transfer is if the property has a great image with an audience, the audience is going to think the same way about that sponsor. So again, if I'm a sports team and you have an image as a family-oriented brand, by virtue of the sponsorship, you're going to think of that, the fans are going to think of that sponsor as family-oriented. So you're starting to create connections. You're starting to increase loyalty. You're starting to transfer that avidity, right? The loyalty towards that property is being transferred to that sponsor. So often sponsorship can increase all those indicators around the brand that really speak to the avidness, the loyalty, all those things. So you're taking customers and turning them into super customers through the power of the sponsorship.
And you can get a lot more for that than what you necessarily are always going to translate spend, because we brought up a couple of examples, whether it was the Chicago Cubs or St. Jude Hospital.
Right.
The people that necessarily, depending on how much they promote it internally or how much maybe gets covered in the news, for example, let's say if you donate $100 million to St. Jude, it'll be on the news. If you donate $10,000, you can still build a lot of fans who just know you're helping support. They're not going to really get into the details of figuring out whether or not, and I don't mean that to be sly by any stretch of the imagination. I hope somebody can figure out a way to give 100 million and not 10,000. But you get all of the bonus points, if you will, just for helping support good causes when you do things like this.
Yeah, sure.
The Little League team. The Little
Right.
League, you don't have to give them $1 million. You just have to help a few kids with a few balls and bats and stuff.
But Shark, I'm glad you mentioned that, because like the St. Jude example is awesome, because you don't get bonus points. You get double and triple bonus points. And there's research that will back that up in terms of when you align a sponsorship with a cause that people feel strongly about, like what St. Jude does to help, children and families who have illness, then all of a sudden you feel even more strongly about
100%.
the sponsor.
Yeah, well, as a customer for the same brand that I at one time worked for, I felt better about that brand and was more likely to give them money because of who they worked with. Now, that's one of the best examples, or maybe it's a harder example, but St. Jude or any of these great causes, these great hospitals, they'll take more sponsorship opportunities. So it's a great way for any brand to get the word out there with the right kind of message. I'm not a Cubs fan. I love going to their games, but that one works too. So how do we define then at least the value that we hope to achieve? I mean, what is the fair ROI that we need to wrap around something? I know it depends on this particular outcome always, but what sort of a benchmark that somebody needs to look at with how to set this? Because this can be something that is not always attributable, but speaks so much to the brand. I mean, for example, one of my favorite brands on the planet is probably the master at partnership marketing, if you will, and that's St. Jude Hospital. I mean, they partner with so many companies that they partner with, or that those companies have done so much to show how they're helping support St. Jude Hospital. Yeah, it's a pretty easy win to all your customers. That's understandable. It says, we're buying from you because you work with St. Jude. Not everybody's able to really develop that kind of feel-good story though around. I mean, the Cubs are great, but it's not, the greatest children's hospital on the planet either.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So there are two aspects of it, right? So from a cost perspective, because that's part of the ROI calculation, we usually recommend people think no less than 1-to-1 or 0.5-to-1. So if you pay $100,000 for rights fees, you want to plan to spend $100,000 for leverage. So that's kind of the cost, the bottom part of the cost calculation. The second part is you're looking at results from that may or may not be converted into dollars. So if you're trying to create sales lift, that will convert to dollars. But if you want to create brand awareness, or if you want to create increased brand consideration or improve your image, that's measurable, but it may not be measurable in dollars and cents to create an ROI against that. The question is, what would it take to produce that kind of outcome if you weren't using sponsorship? So how much money would you have to spend in advertising to improve your brand image, et cetera? So sometimes you could do that. If I increase my sales, I can create an ROI. Like, for example, we work with an aerospace company that sells jets. And in the relationship that they had in sports, for every $1 million they spent, they earned $32 million in terms of jet sales. That's pretty ascertainable because they're selling a product. If you're really trying to improve your image, so for example, Bridgestone Firestone, many years ago, when the Wilderness tire was the tire of the Ford Explorer. The question was, when the Ford Explorer flipped in a very famous series of accidents, was it caused by that Firestone Wilderness tire? There was a question about that, but both brands suffered. Well, Firestone became the official tire of the IndyCar series at the time to demonstrate that they were safe, reliable, and consistent. And if an IndyCar could travel at 200 miles an hour without failure of the tire, then it can travel safely with your family. And the improvement of their image was really valuable to Firestone as part of that. In terms of what Firestone spent on that sponsorship, the impact, the ROI was invaluable, because they were able to take a very public relations issue and flip it, right? No pun intended. They were able to demonstrate they were safe, reliable, and consistent through the power of partnership marketing. So that's an example. In the first example with the aerospace company, you saw a 32-to-1, sales return on investment. In the Firestone example, you saw an incredible benefit from a brand perspective from a partnership relationship.
How do we look at doing this then that is not necessarily just sticking your logo on something like Bridgestone, but what are some other successful ones that's such a great story, because that's as much of a reputation management issue, to turn it into a feel-good story, and it goes along with brand and everything else.
I think some of the B2B sponsorships have some really good examples of that in terms of not just sticking a logo on something. So I really like the Microsoft Surface sponsorships, where you see a Microsoft Surface in a NASCAR pit box. You see it on an NFL sideline. So you see the Microsoft logo, so they're there. So their logo is kind of stuck on that product. But it really comes to life because that the team is relying on that computer to call plays and analyze data real time during the game. And from a NASCAR pit box perspective, the fate of the race relies on that technology. So you saw Dell computers do the same thing when Levi's Stadium kind of opened in Santa Clara. And they became the technology of the stadium in terms of all the things that fans enjoyed that made the experience of attending a football game in that stadium more enjoyable. It was facilitated in part by Dell and the technologies that were integrated into the actual fabric of the stadium. So you have those are two examples of where sponsorships come to life, and everyone, B2C or B2B, you have to take it to the next level. And that's why it's not just buying the logo and doing a logo slap. It's how do I bring that to life? How do I integrate my product into the actual, if it's a sporting event, the competition? How do I change lives? How do I improve the experience of fans at a sporting event? So when those things happen, when the brand comes to life through the power of the partnership, not just that logo exposure, but through that power of one-on-one interaction with consumers, that creates that memorable moment, that experience, that really that change in behavior that will cause a consumer to think better of you, that will cause a consumer to perhaps buy your product when they haven't before. The stories in sponsorship are replete with examples of those types of things when you really kind of change the behavior and thoughts and experience of consumers through sponsorship.
And I just want to remind everybody that this show is now brought to you by Pepsi. So our new sponsor, preferably Dr. Pepper, but I'll take Pepsi. So what are some of the pitfalls that you've seen that people need to avoid? Because there's just as many mistakes that haven't made sense as success stories out there. What do people need to not do to avoid like a plague in a sponsorship?
Yeah, don't sponsor it because you necessarily like it. I mentioned earlier about the hobby sponsorship.
Yeah.
So divorce your personal feelings from it. You may not be a fan of the particular thing that's being sponsored, but the question would be, are your customers a fan? So that's kind of the first series of mistakes that I see, or when they're done for the wrong reason. Second is going in under optimized. And we talked about, if you pay $100,000 for a rights fee, you have to have the budget to make that come to life. And what I see sometimes is that sponsors, they go all in on the rights fee, often because they're desperate for that relationship. But then when it comes budget time, they go back in the conference room, they look at each other around the table and they go, well, do you have budget for it? No. Do you have budget for it? No. And so they under optimize that relationship, so it falls flat often. So that's kind of the second major series of mistakes that we see on a fairly regular basis in terms of sponsors making, in terms of getting into relationships.
Well, you brought up the PGA example, just as a kind of joke example, but it's funny now that I think about it, a lot of those relationships are done on the golf course, and that's how a lot of this stuff, from board members gets translated literally and figuratively. So
right, and I'm not against that.
No, I mean it makes sense, but I know of one in particular in my career that's been made that way. So
it's part of the sales process, right?
Exactly. Well, and another thing, and this came into podcasting early, and I think people talk about podcasting, for example, with all the advertising opportunities out there. It's like a commercial. I've never been a big, massive fan of that. But one of the things that I've pivoted towards my own show, and it's a lot more of better conversations, are sponsors. And I've seen this done well with a lot of friends who have top podcasts as well. And a lot of them are drawn to mind because of the names that I've had on the show. And so I've seen some really interesting sponsorship offerings this year. It's been really interesting that people have thrown at me, but I've seen all kinds of just new sponsorship opportunities that people are discussing this year. One of them I saw for a friend of mine that's a speaker as well, that's also during normal times we're out on the speaking trail. He is now sponsored as a speaker, not necessarily as a brand ambassador like a Guy Kawasaki is for Canva and Mercedes, but he's sponsored as a speaker, and we'll drop in that sponsorship reference, and that's coming up. I thought it was kind of odd when I saw it hit podcasting a few years ago, but I really have started to see it as pretty odd now that you get it with individuals. That's not necessarily a brand, like a typical influencer relationship, like Bang Energy Drink and a cute girl standing on the beach on Instagram. Those
Right.
have always sort of been there and always will be, but we're seeing a lot more different sponsorships than I would have thought we would have seen before.
Yeah, and it's really about the channel, right? So podcasting as a channel or social as a channel. And it's, can a brand and a property, no matter how you define a brand or a property, right? So a brand could be a person, a brand could be a product. How those two people or those two entities can find value with each other, regardless of the channel. So I've seen a lot of sponsorship in podcasting recently because podcasting as a channel within marketing is increasing in popularity and effectiveness. So of course, sponsorship's going to find its way where it's effective and popular. So there's a lot, and especially with COVID, we're seeing a lot of sponsorship go digital. And this is a great digital platform, right? We don't have to be next to each other and share germs. So
Yeah. Well, I just did a show not that long ago with a friend of mine who does this as well. They seen this massive uptick in people moving their trade show dollars to other digital platforms like podcasts. So, I mean, it comes up all the time, but are people coming to you, asking you primarily to help develop that strategy for them? Or is it more connecting the dots with potential sponsorship opportunities, the actual sponsors that they're going to work with on a day-to-day?
it's both, right? So like recently with the start of COVID, it's a lot about retooling either existing sponsorships or really converting things to a more digital format. Plus, there's been so much about renegotiation and cancellations and postponements and sponsorship and how do you pick up the pieces, right? Prior to COVID, and I think I see some of this activity coming back, is find an opportunity. Let's connect the dots. Let's scan what's out there and find the right opportunity for me. That activity is starting to pick up again, but it's both really in terms of kind of what clients need, both on the brand side and the property side. Because it isn't one size fits all, right? This is such a custom area where, every relationship is different. Even in the same sponsorship, when Coke leaves and Pepsi comes in. That could be a completely different sponsorship with different goals and different executions and all those types of things. It's definitely not one size fits all.
Well, if you see any sponsorship opportunities for podcasters that swim with sharks on a regular basis, as often as I can travel now, who've done MMA and been failed stand-up comics, but also work in business, let me know, because that's the specific lane I'm going for right
That's great. That's a little bit niche, but it's actually the MMA nautical.
So tell me about your book, though. Your book's Sponsorship Strategy, Practical Approaches to Powerful Sponsorship. What inspired you to write that book, and what's the message you're trying to convey there?
No matter who you are or what you stand for, I want sponsorships to work. Whether I'm involved or agencies involved or not involved, we have a vested interest in demonstrating on a daily basis that sponsorship can improve business for both properties and brands. So I wrote Sponsorship Strategy as a checklist, as kind of a primer about what are those things that you need to think about to make any sponsorship successful. And strategy is always, we talk about strategies, the front door kind of, and then tactics are the kind of the back door in terms of marketing. So you really want to start with strategy. Those things that start with strategy usually have good outcomes. And so I wanted to combine kind of what are those things in sponsorship that make sponsorship successful, and what are those strategies as part of sponsorship that you may not have thought of, or if you thought of them, here are some tips to make it work better. So we wanted to write that. Again, we wanted to make all sponsorships work better for brands and properties.
So there's a lot of people speaking about this today as well. What's some of the advice that you've heard that is not good advice that people need to avoid? You don't have to call out the people by name, but what do you want people that they may be hearing about? And if they're not going to grab your book, but they're interested, they may consume advice elsewhere. What's the bad advice that you've heard to stay away from with sponsorships?
The bad advice is usually when sponsorship is thrown in as a value add. And it's like, here's this media buy, and by the way, it comes with a sponsorship. And so what I've seen is more times than not when that happens, because the sponsorship wasn't thought through independently, it becomes this useless tag along. And so I see bad advice is, here's this so-called integrated deal that's a sponsorship masquerading as a media buy. And so that's probably number one on my list. I see it too often. Usually,
a lot of those become very patronizing as well. A lot of people see through that.
Right.
Not done well.
Because it wasn't done authentically.
Exactly.
The sponsor doesn't quite know what to do with it, because they really wanted the media. So they know what to do with that. So consumers have a way of sniffing out frauds. So you've got to be totally authentic when you do things like that.
Help define what partnership marketing is, and help define what it is not.
So partnership marketing is when two entities work together to help them each accomplish their goals. Right. So from a sponsor's perspective, it's usually either improve my brand image or help me sell more products and services. From a property perspective, I'm trying to earn revenue, but I'm also trying to provide something of value to my audience. So partnership marketing is when those two parties are acting in concert to help each other accomplish their goals. It's different than advertising, different than social, because usually those are one-way kind of dialogues. This is two entities have to work together to accomplish a goal.
Yeah, and I just said partnership, but I should have said sponsorship.
That's okay.
Because they do somewhat go synonymous, don't they? I mean, there's nothing. I'm trying to think if there's any time I've referenced the two that's been different than the other.
So this is Partnership and sponsorship are synonymous. Where they're not synonymous is where a salesperson, especially from a sports league or team, says, I am the manager of partnership marketing, when really they're a salesperson.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they might be trying to sell tickets, or they might be trying to sell signage. They're not trying to sell a sponsorship relationship. That's when they're not the same. But the way you've used it, a sponsorship is a partnership.
What's the fairest way for data-driven monkeys like me, who focus heavily on attribution, to really look at the best way of justifying the spend for anything? You've given us a plan on the 1-to-1 or the 1.5-to-1 on spend, but how do you justify this to your senior leadership, your C-level staff, your board of directors, who probably made the judgment on the golf course anyway? But how does this really translate to people that are very data driven, trying to look for a connection of the dots on attribution?
Yeah, attribution is so important, and generally, I'm working with market research agencies. I'm partnering with them from a survey perspective. So I'm surveying on-site attendees. I'm surveying geographic communities, depending on the sponsorship. I'm looking for things around the sponsorship where I'm seeing lift in brand awareness or things of that nature. If I'm looking at a sales perspective, I'm doing the same thing, and I'm tying either attendees and their buying patterns, but I'm trying as much as possible to create attribution with direct lines, no dotted lines. I'm trying to create those direct lines between that relationship and a change in behavior, either attitudes towards the brand or buying behavior towards the brand. So I'm looking for data. Just like you, I'm looking for data because we're spending money. So we want to be able to justify that.
So Ken, I asked this, and you noticed this from our Zoom, but you're on a Shark's perspective with a guy that goes by Shark as much or more than he goes by Kenneth. What is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Great question. The Port Jackson shark.
Nice. That's a very rare. I don't know if I've had that one before or not.
There you go. I like to stand out.
That's fantastic.
And the reason is that they are strategic, they are innovative, and they have the personality of an architect, a builder. And I think that describes me, I think, to a T.
Ken, it is that special time in my show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Bring it.
All right. Number 1, good sponsorship one to start with. Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Good. Thank you. Number 2, Ford or Ferrari?
Ooh, Ferrari.
All right. Number 3, Mario Andretti or Danica Patrick? Both of them had big names in your neck of the woods.
They are, but I'm going with Mario.
Yeah, she never won. So she never won, did she? She never won Indy 500.
She won a race at the Twin Ring Motegi.
Yeah, but not the Indy 500. So.
Not the Indy 500.
Number 4, NASCAR or IndyCar?
Wow.
Because you brought up NASCAR, I wouldn't have brought it up because I didn't want to offend somebody that lives in Indianapolis, but you mentioned earlier, so and NASCAR does more sponsorships.
Shark, I work with both.
Exactly.
I'm going C. Okay. Both.
Fair enough. Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today. It's a good Cracker Barrel sponsorship type question.
Love it.
Biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, biscuits.
All right. Ken, where do people get a copy of the book, find out how to get in touch with you, follow your thought leadership, and more?
Sure. The book is available both on Amazon and Apple Books. You can find the link at sponsorshipstrategybook.com. And for anything else about our agency, you can find it at chargesponsorship.com.
Awesome. Ken, thank you again for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thanks, Shark. I appreciate it.
So there was my conversation with Ken Unger, the president of Charge Sponsorship Marketing Agency and the author of Sponsorship Strategy, Practical Approaches to Powerful Sponsorships. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, very interesting how he talked about the evolution of partnership marketing, with people thankfully looking at what do we want to achieve with this rather than just something that feels good. So let's try to throw some money at it. He gave the great example of an executive on the golf course, and then next thing you know, you're a PGA sponsor. I thought more about this after we recorded the show, but it actually reminded me of another dozen times at least over my career of working with brands and where leadership simply felt like something would be a good deal without planning a real strategy around it. So whether it's through partnerships or sponsorships or any other form of marketing, know that there are too many places you can throw your money away, even when they feel good. So get rid of that emotion for 2 minutes for whatever it is and really lay out a successful strategy before you dive in too deep. As he said, divorce your feelings from these decisions. Look at the emotions of your customers instead and how that sponsorship or marketing impacts them in relation to your brand. Does it elicit a better emotional connection for them to your brand? Second, whether it's the Chicago Cubs or not, you can hit a home run with the emotion that you create from a great partnership. You've heard me talk on several episodes about St. Jude Hospital and some work I've done with them. I also did sponsorships with food banks, Toys for Tots, and others. All of these were sponsorship opportunities that when you think of the value they bring to others, well, it's always helpful to support causes like that, of course. And showing that relationship to consumers, that genuine relationship you may have, whether it's a charitable organization or something cool like your logo on a race car, your focus should really be on what creates emotions within them that pulls them closer to your brand. But again, make certain that you also keep your business sense in check, because there are more emotions and more sponsorship opportunities than your wallet likely has cash available to spend. It lives, it's real, it's a shared experience, as he said. And also, considering that a great majority of my shows are focused on growth and lead gen, know that the emotional response by consumers can be leveraged in a very positive way in so many ways in lead gen as well. They can lift the experience and help your brand grow. They can lift the experience and become part of the fabric of your brand. As he reminded us, just don't throw it in as a value add. That's a useless tag along. It's also an experience issue. He said, and I'm partially paraphrasing, it's not just buying the logo, it's how to take it to life. How do I change the lives and improve the experiences? When the brand comes to life with that sponsorship, it creates a change in experience that creates the behavior and thoughts and experience. Great point. Third, and yes, you do need to honestly consider the ROI. He recommends a 1-to-1 or better, and it can be measured in a sales lift or brand awareness or similar. But the other question to ask with this is, what would it take to produce that kind of outcome without sponsorship? Understanding how this aligns with your goals, your audience, and your strategy can really impact how you later measure this as well. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I sincerely hope that you'll partner up with me soon and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.